Whether you're planning a trip to Athens or you just want to explore the Acropolis Museum from the comfort of your sofa, this tour is for you. I'm Jessica, the museum guide, and today I'm taking you on a tour of one of the most important and interesting museums in the world, the Acropolis Museum in Athens, Greece. The Acropolis is one of the most important sites in antiquity, and a visit here will blow your mind.
On today's tour, we're going to be covering the first three galleries: the South Slope, the Archaic Gallery, and the Gallery of Other Periklean Monuments. Then, in part two, we'll be covering the other two galleries, including the Parthenon sculptures itself. If you're new to my channel, welcome! I'm absolutely delighted to have you here, and I hope you'll stick around. If you'd like more content, including an extra video tour every month, access to my archives, ad-free videos, and in-person free tours every year, head on over to my Patreon. I've linked it above and below. I cover all kinds of cool and weird museums that I don't put on my main channel.
Welcome to the Acropolis Museum's first gallery, the first that you enter when you enter the museum. This is the gallery of the Acropolis slopes, and it is sloped upwards, as you can see behind me, to give us the experience of walking up the hill of the Acropolis, as if we are Athenians of ancient times. Let's start having a look. We're being welcomed into the museum by a pair of ceramic Nikai, cast from the same mold. And by the way, Nikai is plural of Nike, the winged embodiment of victory in athletic competitions. Now, they are not the oldest objects we'll see today. Far from it. They date to around the 1st or 2nd century AD, but their greeting stance is quite fitting for our tour. Well, they might not be the best at greeting because they're missing their hands and also their wings. You can see that they have holes where these appendages would have been slotted in here on the back, and let's go around to the behind. And we can see that there are actually some holes at the tops of their shoulders where the wings would have been slotted in. They are a really beautiful warm terracotta color, and they're dressed in the traditional peplos, which was a heavy woolen dress circled with a belt at the waist. Look at their long, beautiful hair. It's tied back and it's secured with a diadem that's like a headband that sits on top of the head. Everything's sort of undulating and flowing. Now, that's the true genius of ancient Greek sculpture, isn't it? This sense of movement. And we're going to talk about the evolution of that on our tour today. They're graceful and idealized, but they have a lifelike depiction of the textiles and fabrics. They look like they've just set down here on Earth. Archaeologists believe that they are acroteria, decorative features placed on a plinth on a roof, but we don't know on which building. These Nikai were found in an ancient well, and the original building, which was likely a grand public one, has been lost. Beneath my feet here, up this ramp, lots of archaeological excavation. Now, this gallery has a few different parts, which together help us to understand the rock's history and unique topographical layout. The Acropolis was home to cults, sanctuaries, theaters, concert halls, and then towards the bottom, private homes. Running down the sides of the walls are a series of display cabinets. This is called the settlement, and it displays finds from the settlements that emerged on the slopes of the Acropolis between the 3rd millennium BC through to the 6th century AD. A massive archaeological dig took place in the 1950s, and most of these objects were discovered then. Here we encounter not just objects of religion, like the dedications that we'll talk about at length, but also objects of average everyday life, which I always find so fascinating. Cooking vessels, domestic decor, and grave goods. Let's talk here about this slab, which is labeled as a funerary table because it's decorated with funeral scenes and depictions of mourning, but it was probably initially used as a grave marker. However, it is most notable because it lived a second life as a sacrificial altar in a private home on the south slope, and we think it may have belonged to philosopher Proclus. Let's have a closer look at it. In this relief on the front, a young man says goodbye to an older seated woman. She holds her hand to her face. She might be expressing her sadness that he's leaving her for death, or she might actually be the deceased. Behind her is a little girl leaning on the back of her chair, and a small boy is just behind the young man. Now let's look just on the other side here. We can see a seated youth surrounded by 4 philosophers, speaking to the 2 philosophers who are in front of him. On the other side, we can see a young man, maybe it's the same one. Look, we can see his hand is up on his brow. He's speaking to 3 women. The middle woman is using her hand to hide her face, but again, we aren't sure which of these 4 figures is the deceased. For many centuries after its use as a funeral slab, it was in a domestic setting. Located below carved representations of the mother goddess Cybele and the god of healing Asclepius. That is what we see up on the wall here. Again, we think that this was not just a private swanky home, but Proclus's philosophy school, making the side depicting the philosophers a perfect bit of decor. Let's head now to the finds associated with the sanctuary of Asclepius. There were many caves and natural plateaus in the Acropolis' slopes, and these were used as places to worship gods and nymphs associated with popular cults. The south slope was home to 2 of the most important sanctuaries, those of Asclepius and Dionysos. His sanctuary was located on the south slope, and it was an integral part of life for Athenians, who believed that Asclepius and his family could heal their ailments. That's why the rod of Asclepius is still used as a medical symbol, often conflated or confused with the caduceus, but that's a different video. There are some different medical votives here. We talk about those on my channel a lot because in different times in history and in different religions, including medieval Christianity, you would bring a physical representation of your afflicted body part to the temple or the church in hopes that the offering would provide some relief, or in many cases, to express gratitude for healing. Let's have a look now at Praxia's dedication at the sanctuary of Asclepius. This is one of my favorite things in the entire Acropolis Museum. It's an unusual offering to Asclepius. Carved into this limestone pillar, there are 5 niches meant to contain votive offerings, like some of those that we already just saw in the display case. But of course, the most notable one here is this white marble face with incredibly piercing eyes. The artist did something really unusual here. He used different stones to create hyper-realistic eyes. They're white for the sclera and then brown for the iris and a black pupil. But the realism is heightened by that little bit of red in the inner corner. Just look at this. Have I mentioned that I love this? This was very clearly an offering from a wealthy family, probably with many members, because having a ready-made pillar with available niches was convenient, and when somebody got sick, it was easy to make a dedication. When archaeologists excavated this pillar, they could see that there was still an inscription. It stated that a woman was suffering from an eye illness, and her husband was offering an image of her eyes to Asclepius to help her get better. Look here, you can also see some other votive offerings. This is clearly a breast. Somebody had breast cancer, most likely. A leg, eyes, and an ear. Oh, I love this owl. I love this one here. This was used as a support for a seat in the Odeon Theatre. Just a little bit of decoration. While I'm here at the Acropolis Museum, it's so easy to use an eSIM to stay connected and get online. As you can see here, I already downloaded the Saili app while I was at the airport. I just followed the easy written instructions on the app, so it was activated as soon as I got here to Greece. With Saili, I only need to install the eSIM once. I don't have to do it every time I enter a different country. I'm actually heading to France next week, and since I selected a European regional plan, I don't have to change eSIMs. So easy, it'll be good to go when I get there. I chose my affordable data plan with unlimited data. That's really important when I'm making videos like this, uploading content and doing research. I don't have to worry about running out of data or worse, coming home to a massive surprise bill. If you're traveling and you want to hit the ground running with simple instructions, you need a Saili eSIM. You can get an exclusive 15% discount on Saili eSIM travel plans. Just download the Saili app and use my code MUSEUMGUIDE at checkout. Let's now have a look at another object from the Temple of Asclepius. This is a relief of a small temple and portico. Now that sanctuary was founded in 420 BC as both a temple and a sort of hospital. Inside the temple, you would find a statue of Asclepius, a sacred spring, and an offering pit. I love that term. The sanctuary also had two stoas, that is, halls. One was an abaton for patients to spend the night in the hopes that Asclepius would visit in their dreams and cure them, and another was a dining hall. On the left is the temple, and on the right side is one of the stoas. We can see Asclepius here, larger than life, as any good god was, leaning on his staff decorated with entwined snakes. There's his rod of Asclepius, and here is his wife, a Peony, just behind him. She's the goddess of soothing pain, and his daughter, Hygeia, the goddess of hygiene, and they are welcoming a group of devotees. There's actually a goose under a Peony's seat. Rich goose eggs and meat were given to patients to improve their health. Now look over at the group of worshippers. There's a pig down here, which would be offered as a sacrifice, which was a must in exchange for medical treatment. There are 9 more adults and 2 children. One of these is the patient. Look here at the servant girl carrying a box on her head. This probably contains the bedding needed for the overnight stay at the sanctuary. Remember, while the patients slept, Asclepius could heal them. Over here on the right side, here is a Herm decorated with the head of the god Dionysos. And over on the other side, we can see goddess Hecate holding flaming torches. She was the goddess of night, ghosts, and magic, and she was skilled in the healing properties of the herbs. That would be a fixture in the Temple of Asclepius. This is another collection of objects dedicated to one of the sanctuaries on the Acropolis, the sanctuary of Dionysos. Next to this sanctuary was the theater of Dionysos. He's a lot of fun, remember? The god of vegetation and wine. This was Athens' most important Dionysus sanctuary. So it was lavish and regularly hosted great celebrations where they reenacted scenes from the lives of the gods. And it can hold 16,000 spectators. Now here is the man, the god himself. This is the left half of a larger-than-life mask of Dionysus, found in the vicinity of the sanctuary. Here, Dionysus is portrayed as an old man. He has a thick beard and his hair is held back with a band. Some metal decorations would have fit into the holes that you can see here. Dionysus is gazing down at the ground, and so we think that this mask was probably suspended up high. It would have been dressed with ceremonial garments, and religious festivities would have gathered around the mask, with people dancing and celebrating. We know this from paintings on vases. The one here, even though it's only half, is a rare survivor. These are relief plaques of theater masks. There were 3 types of ancient drama: comedies, tragedies, and satire, and that still kind of stands today. They were originated and perfected here in Athens. Works by the ancient Greek greats, Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes, their works were all performed here for the first time at the Theater of Dionysus. Now these masks would have been designed to be seen from below, just like the Mask of Dionysus. Now based on that perspective, we know it would have been hung up high, and so this has led experts to believe that this was part of the architectural decoration of the stage at the Theater of Dionysus, or potentially an ancient copy of an even older decoration. They're probably meant to represent members of the chorus. These were men who dressed up as women to sing. This is the final of the South Slope sanctuaries that we're going to talk about. These display cases are filled with the objects from the small open-air sanctuary of the Nymphe. She was the divine protectress of marriage and weddings. All of these elaborate ceramic vases could be used for transporting water, yes, but they were also especially significant to women and women's spaces, especially for wedding wishes. These are called protomes. That means they represent the torso or face of a person or animal, and these were offered in the sanctuary of the Nymphe primarily to female deities. They could be placed in domestic shrines or used as apotropaic, that is protective objects, or even grave offerings in women or children's burials. Experts are torn on their full meaning because some seem to be of deities and others represent mortal people. Now, some of these more elaborate ones were actually decorations attached to the outside of the lutrophori to give them a bit more pizzazz. You can see that here. And lutrophori, what are those? They're these big vases. And you could see how these could be on the outside. Each lutrophoros is depicted with different scenes, but many of them include scenes of marriage or domesticity. Lutrophori like this were often used as a symbolic gesture to show a bride leaving her family home and being welcomed into her husband's family home.
I think it's a good time to go over a history of the Acropolis and of the museum itself. The Acropolis is a rocky outcrop, technically a mesa, that rises above the majestic city of Athens, and it's covered with monuments and temples in varying states of ruin. It was inhabited as early as around the 4th millennium BC, but started to attract a number of temples and offerings around 700 BC. That's roughly when the temple of Athena Polias and the Hekatompedon were built, and we'll talk about them shortly. However, it was transformed into ancient Greece's premier religious sanctuary and monument to art and beauty in the 5th century BC under Pericles. We'll speak about that soon too.
We've got to check out the Lego Acropolis.
The Acropolis was the site of the legendary contest between Poseidon, god of the sea, and Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. Now, this is a rather new museum. It was built at the base of the Acropolis to house the artifacts found on the rock and its surrounding slopes, and the museum was founded in 2003, opening to the public in 2009. Here, there are more than 4,000 objects exhibited over 14,000 square meters, and it's a stunning, truly state-of-the-art place. Now, this state-of-the-art nature will become even more important in part 2 when we talk about the Parthenon sculptures. Because traditionally, one of the excuses given for the reason why the Parthenon should stay in London was that Athens just simply didn't have a place to display them. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth now, could it? As we can see here, the museum also lies over the ruins of part of the Roman and early Byzantine Athens, and archaeological digs are ongoing right beneath our feet.
Think of it this way, the museum doesn't just document ancient Greece, it is ancient Greece.
Look just beneath my feet. This glass floor showcases the ongoing archaeological excavations. By the way, there was an older museum here before this one. The first museum, which was actually on the Acropolis, opened in 1874 and was remodeled in the 1950s.
It's time to leave the gallery of the South Slopes. We're heading up our first flight of stairs now to enter the Archaic Gallery. But before we really get into the gallery, we've got to have a look at the Hekatompedon. The Archaic Gallery covers the vast time period between the 7th and the 5th century BC, a time of immense change in art and sculpture in ancient Greece. The Hekatompedon connects us to an even more ancient past than being here at the Acropolis does, because this is part of the monolithic temple, also dedicated to Athena, that stood on the Acropolis before the construction of the Parthenon. These temples and sanctuaries were destroyed by the Persians in 480 BC. Now, for us today in an archaeological museum, that destruction was actually kind of a blessing, but we'll get to that. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's have a good look at the Hekatompedon pediments now. A pediment, by the way, is a triangular gable on the front of a temple or building. It's usually supported by columns, and you'll be very familiar with pediments soon. This is the West Pediment. It's wild and covered in stories of chimeric beasts, myths, and legends. This is everything that we love about ancient Greek storytelling. This was also from a time when the artists were experimenting with their craft and figuring out how to showcase an entire multi-layered myth into a triangular space. It's comprised of 3 separate groupings. Let's start in the center with these massive lions. They're tearing into the bull with their claws and eating it. The bull's wounds that would have run red with blood where the lions have gashed into them. You can see the remainder of some of the paint. This would have been really gory. Now, we haven't spoken about painting yet, but what you need to know is that these statues, most of them would have been a garish riot of colors, absolutely bedecked in bright paint. I know we're very used to seeing them in their natural stone colors, but this would have been a very different experience. I mean, just look at the scales on this fish body or Triton's body. You can see the remnants of the red and the black paint. Here is Heracles, yes, also known to the Romans as Hercules, the most powerful Greek hero. He's wrestling with Triton, the son of Poseidon, god of the sea. The Triton's half human, so he has a fish's lower half and a human's upper body. Now over on this side, the right, Heracles is again fighting, this time with a winged 3-bodied demon monster with 3 bearded heads, each of the bodies holding a symbol of nature, a wave, a flame, and a bird, water, fire, and air. Look at the lower portion of the demon. He has intertwined snake tails that symbolize the 4th natural element, earth. Some people think this is the personification of hell, but it could also be the sea god Nereus, who could transform into different natural elements. No one is sure. This is great to be able to see some of the examples of the different kinds of marble and the different tools that the artists would have used to create these beautiful sculptures. Now get ready to see a lot of archaic smiles. You'll find that in Greek statue of this time period, the expressions on the face of the statues are pretty samey. Everyone has the same kind of subtle, peaceful smile on their face, almost like a Mona Lisa smile, quite enigmatic. It's meant to symbolize a state of emotional balance and well-being, almost beatific, transcendent, rising above human emotions.
Now, speaking of the archaic smile, this is one of the most famous statues in the museum and is known in Greek as a Moscophoros, or calf bearer. However, we know exactly who this calf bearer depicts because the dedication plaque also survives. It is dedicated to Rhombos, son of Palos, and it is probably a depiction of Rhombos. Now, he might look a bit nude, but he is actually wearing a thin cloak. That would have been more obvious because this used to be vibrantly painted. The calf he is carrying is his offering to the goddess. He dates to the 6th century BC, which means it dates to the time of some of the earliest dedications at the Acropolis. Lavish gifts and statues presented to Athena and other gods by Athenian citizens to express their gratitude and seek for their prayers to be answered. This statue was very expensive, so Rhombos was probably from the aristocratic class. As I briefly mentioned, it is rather fortuitous that we still have this statue. See, when the Persians invaded Athens and sacked the Acropolis in 480 BC, they desecrated and destroyed most of the things they found. Afterwards, Athenians buried the broken and damaged dedications, which actually preserved them for thousands of years. It's rather ironic, isn't it? It was the Persian destruction of these sculptures that led to them being protected beneath the earth and then dug up by archaeologists thousands of years later. By the way, Rhombos has chosen a very meaningful image for his dedication. A man carrying an animal, bearing its weight both literally and symbolically as it is taken to be sacrificed. Even 2,500 years ago, this had ancient origins. This image would go on to become popular iconography in the new religion of Christianity, with Christ as the Good Shepherd carrying the ram.
Now next up we have the Peplos Kore, dating to around 530 BC. Her name comes from the fact that early archaeologists thought she was wearing a peplos, that is, a simple garment pinned at the shoulders, like these. Kore is a clothed female figure. The word means girl or young woman, and they are the counterpart to the male koros, who were nude. Kore and koros together are called korai. For the past few centuries, experts have believed that she is one of these korai. However, new research shows that she might actually be a goddess herself. That's because while some art historians and antiquities scholars still hold on to the idea that she is wearing a simple peplos, others say, nah, no way. She is wearing a chiton on top of her peplos, which was a fancier bit of kit. And others say there is even a cape on top of that. It's just a really unusual silhouette. So, some research has been done into the remaining pigments left on the stone. That's called a spectrographic analysis, and it's now believed that she may be Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. Her white garment was decorated with small animals and riders, and a lot of red and brown pigment was used on her hair and eyes. She also has a lot of holes in her head and a bronze loop sticking out, which would suggest a diadem or another metal headdress. Those are not found in Kore. Her hand may have held a bow and arrow, also supporting the theory that she is Artemis. Of course, if we knew what she was carrying, it would settle everything. But look at her fist here. This looks like the perfect grip for an arrow. This is very much an archaic figure. Just look at her smile, so typical of archaic sculptures. Regardless of her true identity, she is one of the most exceptional archaic sculptures here at the museum. Now, despite having made a video about cat statues in London, I actually love dogs, and I delight in talking about them. So we are going to pause here on the statue of a hunting dog carved in around 520 BC. He is poised and ready to hunt. Dogs were a valuable asset in ancient Greece, not only as hunting companions, but also for their friendship and loyalty, just like today. Listen, I know dogs are supposed to be lithe and lean, but this boy is too skinny for me. I like a slightly chunkier dog. The archaeologists believe that he was one of a pair guarding the sanctuary of Artemis Brauronia on the Acropolis. Artemis is often accompanied by a pack of hunting dogs, a gift from Pan, symbolizing her role as a master of the forest and protector of wildlife. Now we have our first of two statues riding horses. This is the Rampin Rider. I think he looks a bit like Jigsaw, no? Obviously, the statue is incomplete, but we can see his unusual stance. The koros is nearly sitting on the horse's mane. Speaking of the mane, there are holes drilled here where an elaborate metal bridle could have been affixed. We're really seeing the origins of a classical Greek style of horseman here. The youth has the same archaic smile that we've already been seeing, and look at his elaborate hair and manicured beard. He is noble, and he wears a wreath on his head that marks him as a winner of one of the 4 Pan-Hellenistic games. However, look at his abdomen. It almost looks like he has spray-painted abs. It's not a very realistic body, so let's put a pin in that. And we're going to bring him up later when we compare him to lapith sculptures at the Parthenon. By the way, this isn't the Rampin Rider's real head. This is a copy. The real head is in the Louvre.
Now let's go and have a look at this, a statue of a Persian or Scythian rider. Experts disagree on where he is meant to be from, but we know he wasn't local based on his Eastern attire. Obviously his torso and head are missing, but his lower half can tell us so much. First of all, he's fully dressed in trousers, unlike so many here in the museum. We can also see that he wears a short chiton, decorated with a leaf motif. These were red, green, and blue, outlined in yellow. And we can see replicas of the textiles. Now we know that he was meant to be an archer because he has drilled holes on his left thigh. That would have been for attaching the quiver. The horse also has quite a cool stylized mane, but it would have been even more impressive as a bronze forelock tuft could be added. So his clothing and nice horse suggest that he was either Persian or Scythian. That is, from the nomadic tribes of people from the steppes north of the Black Sea. There is a historic basis for either origin story. There were a few hundred Scythian archers in Athens at this time. However, a similar rider appears on a plate, now in Oxford, that reads Miltiades Kalos, meaning Miltiades the Handsome. The Athenian general Miltiades spent time in Thrace fighting the Scythians alongside the Persians in his youth, so this could be a sort of nostalgic rendering. This statue from the pediment of the Temple of Athena, Polius, depicts Athena during the Gigantomachy, a mythical battle between the gods and giants as giants tried to overrun Athens. All that remains of the giant is part of a single foot. Yes, later on we will be surrounded by the elegance of classical Greece, but this is the raw emotion and belief system that underpins all of that art to come. This was such an important and established temple to the ancient Greeks that they just called it the Old Temple and needed no other name. During the Gigantomachy, all of the gods were there, but here in this pediment we only see Athena. Just look at her. She is in warrior goddess mode with her spear, now missing, raised and donning her aegis, that is, her protective cloak detailed with snakes that symbolizes Athena Polius's divine guardianship over the city of Athens. Even though this is still the Archaic period, there is unbelievable skill to show these undulating snakes in marble. They look like they're actually moving. There are holes in her helmet, and look, bronze snakes could have been attached here. Now this is a big deal. This is the Kritios Boy, named for the sculptor Kritios, who we think completed this work. Now he may just look simple, but he is one of the most important pieces in this museum, if not the single most important piece. We stand here on the bridge between the stiffness of the Archaic period and the elegant, flowing, and lifelike classical period. He's just chilling out, no dramatic gestures or grand movements, but his body looks and feels like a real person, but it is elevated to include aspects of the divine. This statue rewrote the rules. In some ways, Kritios Boy is an example of a Koros. Remember, that's the male counterpart to a Kore. After all, he's standing on two legs, he's nude. But again, just look at the difference. Something has happened here. A light bulb has gone off. Now let's start with the obvious. He's made of marble, has a broken leg, and he's missing his arms. Just like with the calf bear, this probably occurred in 480 BC. Remember, the Greeks then buried their damaged statues, including this one. But to understand this sculpture, we have to turn back the clock 10 years before that, to 490 BC. That's when the Greeks scored a decisive victory against the Persians at Marathon, which bolstered a sense of nationalistic pride and ushered in a new era for Athens. Art historians argue that it was this self-assuredness that led to a newfound sense of realism in sculptures like this one. I mean, he's a world away from a typical Koros. There's just so much musculature, volume, realized joints. He looks like he's about to move, and more importantly, he looks like he could move if he wanted to. That's because he's standing in a pose called contrapposto. We talk about this a lot in art history. Essentially, his weight is shifted onto one leg, and the rest of his body has shifted accordingly. The Archaic Smile is gone too. This led art historians to dub this time period the severe period, although I think he looks quite relaxed. Also notice that his eyes have been hollowed out. How could you not notice? But unlike so many other marble sculptures, he would have had inset marble or paste eyes, like we normally see in a bronze statue. This is around the innovation of bronze casting, which will allow artists like Kritios to do so much more. And we can see that he is incorporating some of these techniques into the far less forgiving marble, which makes them all the more impressive. We will definitely be continuing the story of Kritios Boy and his influence on what's to come in part 2 of this video.
Let's now have a look at the relief of the Pensive Athena. You'll see why she's called that. Now, just remember that this used to have a vibrant blue background. Though her body is swayed, she feels relaxed, not slouchy. Now, in most cases, the gods are armored. And yes, Athena is wearing a helmet here, of course, but here she's also barefoot, and this really humanizes her. But it's the tilt of her head that has led to her nickname as the Pensive Athena, although some people think she is mourning, but I think it makes the mood of the piece feel really contemplative. She's not a warrior here, she's standing still with her thoughts. This was actually common for Greek gods. They're allowed to have moments of pause and reflection, a grace we should really offer to everyone. Now, we're still on the first floor, but we're entering the gallery dedicated to Other Periklean Monuments. That is, other buildings that were built at the same time as the Parthenon, such as the Propylaea, the monumental arch. Here's a little piece of the Propylaea. And the Erechtheion. Here's a model of it here that we will speak about at length. entering this gallery, we're at a crossroads between that archaic period and the classical period. We're going to see a transition between those two styles of art.
By the way, those of you who watch my channel regularly know that I usually use CE and BCE instead of BC and AD. The reason I'm doing it today, I don't know, the mood captured me. The Acropolis Museum does use BC and AD, so I decided to follow suit.
Let's focus first on this head of Hermes, which is an ancient copy created in the 1st century BC. Yes, we have been copying existing works of art for thousands of years. This isn't a new thing. We think that this copy was for the Hermes Propylaeos from 430 BC by Alcamenes, a student of Phidias, the artist who designed a lot of the sculpture on the Parthenon. Remember, Hermes was the messenger god, and he was associated with boundaries around the underworld. That's why people created pillars called Herms, topped with statues of Hermes as boundary markers. Now, midway down a lot of these Herms, they would also actually be decorated with Hermes genitals, but I don't think I have any of those to show you today. These Herms were placed at important crossroads, in this case, the Propylaea Gate. Here we can see the ancient Greek sculptors taking inspiration from earlier periods. Just like we might today draw inspiration from Renaissance works, his corkscrew curls evoke the archaic period. That said, his facial features definitely belong to the classical period. He looks like he could work in a craft beer bar. Wow, look at this gold lamp. This is a lamp in the shape of a warship, and it was found in the Erechtheion. That is wild. This is the Erechtheion Frieze. Normally, friezes, like the ones we'll see from the Parthenon, are done in relief, but these ones on the Erechtheion are almost carved in the round. They were indeed carved as standalone figure from Kouros marble and then attached to the marble slab with metal brackets, and that's really unusual. The Erechtheion was built at the same time as the Parthenon, and it still stands, but the frieze and statues were in such poor condition that they were removed and brought to the museum. More than 100 elements of the Erechtheion frieze have been preserved. They mostly depict women and children, but there are also horses and chariots and men. That said, so much of the frieze is missing that we can't fully understand the story, though it stands to reason that these are myths and legends associated with Erechtheios, the heroic mystical king of Athens. It can be really easy to walk past smaller pieces without realizing just how important and amazing they are. For instance, this is such a remarkable relief, and it's really important for our tour. It's called Nike adjusting her sandal, and it dates to 410 BC. It was originally part of a small Ionic temple to Athena Nike, located on the sacred way to the Acropolis. This relief was on the outside railing of the temple. You can see it mocked up here in the maquette. This faced outwards so that people walking up the sacred way could see it. This is the most famous of the carvings on the parapet, Nike undoing the knot on her sandal, likely to take it off so she can then walk on sacred ground. But just look at the realism of this. She is using her arm to counterbalance her awkward pose. And look just here, you can see her wings jutting out of her back, which are also helping her maintain balance. Most sculptures at this time are about the gods seeming effortless, but this one almost humanizes her. She's saddled to a body that could tip right over. But still we have that classical style over the drapery. This is called the rich style, the diaphanous cloth and graceful way that her garment just skims the outside of her body. This was highly influenced by the artist responsible for the Parthenon, Phidias. It's downright revealing and, dare I even say, erotic. It's very barely skimming the curves of her naked body beneath. Now we're going to go look at some objects that for a lot of people are the highlight of their trip to the Acropolis Museum, the caryatids. These are the caryatids, 5 female figures, Kore. They aren't mere statues. They were also used as columns on the south portico or porch of the Erechtheion. We'll talk about the 6th and where she is a bit later on, but right now you can see this big gap in the middle. Yes, the sixth caryatid is at the British Museum. These are larger than life, with the column capitals rising out of the tops of their head. Well, they're actually rising out of the tops of their hairdos. We're going to come back to their hairdos, but let's look at the impressive drapery of their robes that mimic the fluting on the columns. I love thinking of the actual women who would have served as models for these pieces of functional art. Remember contrapposto that we spoke about with Kritios Boy, the stance supporting more weight on one leg than the other? The caryatids also stand in this way, giving them an elegant yet relaxed posture. Though her leg is bent and her hips sway, by the time we reach her shoulders and head, her body has straightened out. She has to. She has to support a heavy roof. This is the height of the classical period, and they are idealized beauties. But let's look back at their hair. The bulk of the braid or plait is supporting the weakness of the neck. The sculptors have threaded a needle here by maintaining a very feminine, graceful silhouette while giving her the heft she needed to support the weight of the roof. If the platforms on top of their heads remind you of a woman carrying a basket on her head, you're on to something. Vitruvius said that they were women for Carius. That's where the term caryatid comes from. They were being punished by other Greeks for supporting the Persians, and they were made to carry on their heads the weight of all of their clothes and jewelry. However, Lucian said that women from Carius were known for their ceremonial basket dances to honor goddess Artemis, so it could be either one or a different theory. These beauties have undergone a lot of restoration work by conservators since they were removed from the Erechtheion in 1979. The pollution has been carefully removed, and you can now even see traces of their original colors. Now remember, I said the missing one. She's at the British Museum. I know exactly where she is too. And there's a Roman copy of one in a main stairwell. A lot of people think that that's the actual missing caryatid, but it's actually in a different gallery. This was just one of the objects removed from the Acropolis by Thomas Bruce, also known as Lord Elgin. Remember, I talk at length about Lord Elgin in my video about controversies of the British Museum. Whether or not Lord Elgin had permission back then, I think is kind of moot. I think they should be repatriated no matter what.
There are obviously a lot of heated emotions around the Parthenon sculptures, but just as many towards the so-called missing sister that's here at the British Museum. We'll be talking a lot more about Lord Elgin in part 2 of this video, which will be out in a few weeks' time. But for now, this is the perfect place to end part 1 of our tour. I hope you've enjoyed exploring the first half of the Acropolis Museum with me, and that you'll be back to see the rest. I'll see you the next time I'm at the museum.